Back to My Garden, episode 65.
Welcome to Back to My Garden. Discover your passion for gardening. Here's Dave Ledoux.
Are you concerned about toxic chemicals, GMOs, and frankenfood? Don't panic. Grow organic. Discover my new resource for organic gardening. Go to www.backtomygarden.com/myorganic. It pays to garden blog. Get my simple 5-step system for creating your own second income doing what you love part-time. Download instantly for free my garden blogger blueprint at www.backtomygarden.com/secret. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world when you listen to this. I'm Dave Ledoux, and welcome to another episode of Back to My Garden. And folks, I've got a very special guest for you today. Mark is a gardener by name and by nature. He's the supreme commander and head gardener at Bugh Trig, an 18th century Georgian estate in Berwickshire, Scotland. Today, we're going to go deep into what possibly was the best gardening summer ever for the United Kingdom. And Mark and I are going to discuss some of his incredible gardening tips and wisdom. We're talking experience here, folks. I'm very excited. Please welcome from Berwickshire. Now, that's near the Scottish border between Edinburgh and Newcastle. I want to welcome to the show Mark Gardner. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thank you, and thanks for the invite.
Very excited to have you here, sir. You have more gardening experience in your pinky toe than I do in my entire life, so I'm looking forward to asking you questions about all things gardening. And I gave you a very short introduction. I want to get to know you, and our listeners want to hear your stories. Mark, can you take a minute or two and just share with us a little bit about your background and how did you get into gardening?
How did I get into gardening? Well, I've always sort of been a gardener. I've always been interested in gardening. As far back as I can remember. My grandfathers, they were both keen gardeners. My father, he was a very keen gardener, had an allotment. But one of my grandfathers was a gamekeeper on an estate, and I spent most of my time sort of there, holidays, weekends. Indeed, I think the earliest I can remember picking blackcurrants for my granny when I'd be sort of knee-high to a grasshopper, so she could make blackcurrant pies, rather. And I think that's the only, as far back as I can remember. And then I was lucky enough to go to an agricultural high school, which had horticulture as part of its curriculum. Then left school, worked at a hall nearby. Then I left there, went to college, had a placement at the George. Then after that I moved down to Yorkshire for a few years and a big garden there. And then I've come back up to the borders here. And that's really how it's panned so far in the gardening life.
Fantastic. Now, Mark and I are going to talk about gardening. Now, folks, those of you driving in your cars listening to us, or maybe you're jogging and listening to your iPad or iPhone, don't try to take notes. I'm going to take notes for you, and I'm going to put them all up on the blog. And I want you to follow Mark on Twitter. And Mark's Twitter, now let me spell Bugh Trig for you, folks, because it's spelled BughTrigGarden. So that's at Twitter, BughTrigGarden. And Mark, the estate you work at, it has its own websites. I found it and looked it up. Can you talk about a little bit about what a day in your working life is like? Because it's quite romantic and unusual where you work.
Well, a day in my working life, I'll actually live on the estate, which the garden's a stone's throw from my house, really. Come out of work, come out of the house in the morning, walk up the drive a little way, and I'm at work. Surrounded by nature, birds, whatever the weather it is. Go into the garden and then just take it from there. I had a walk around on a Monday to decide what I'm going to do that week, and then I'll pretty much stick to it. Having a big garden like this, you have to sort of keep some sort of order and, where to start and where to finish. You've got to do a certain bit one day, a certain bit the next day, and so on and so forth. A bit like the Forth Road Bridge, as soon as you start painting it and get to the end, you have to start again. You just keep on doing that.
Brilliant. For those of you listening who live in the city, prepare yourself, because Mark has what I would say is an above average garden. Mark, how big is the estate? How many acres?
How big is the whole estate? Oh, crumbs. I couldn't say how big the estate is, but the garden's about 1.5 acres, 2 acres.
That's the size of most city parks. And, so for my container gardeners out there and my backyard gardeners, don't be intimidated, because Mark doesn't do it all overnight and not by himself.
Oh, no, not at all. And the garden that we have, it's very much in rooms. There's lots of different paths and go down little alleyways to different places. And it's very much segregated. And each sort of bit has an atmosphere of its own.
Now, where you are, near the border, it's, most people have never been to Scotland, myself included, but you say Scotland and you think about these rolling hills and amazing forests. What was the climate like? What kind of summer did you have?
We had a fantastic summer here. We're lucky here. It's really, when I first moved up here, I got told it was the sunniest place in Scotland. But definitely this year, it's been absolutely fantastic. Everything was brought on rather early with the heat, and needless to say, everything sort of finished sort of a couple of weeks early. Went over, but couldn't fault this year. It was absolutely fantastic. The roses were gorgeous. With all, obviously we had no rain, so that stopped them rotting off, and the roses finishing quick. Delphiniums, they were absolutely stunning. Actually, I think I've got some pictures on the Twitter account of the delphiniums. They were absolutely fantastic. So reaching for the heavens, all different blues and whatnot.
When you started working there, Mark, this is I think it was built in 1785. So did you inherit some of the garden, and did you get to put your fingerprints on some of it yourself?
Yeah, we inherited. Well, I inherited a lot of the garden. The backbones of the garden has always been the same. And the chap who I started working for, he's since retired, and his son and family have moved in, and they're aiming to put their stamp on the whole garden. And we'll have sort of big changes afoot in the garden. We're going to have a new water feature put into the garden, new kitchen garden put in. And so everything's sort of really exciting at the moment. Really, a garden never stops. A garden always grows.
Well, I'm going to write that down. That's a good line for the website. A garden never stops. For those of you, not everyone knows the terminology kitchen garden. Is that primarily where you grow your vegetables?
Yes, that's it. That's the primary. In the old days, in the Victorian times, the garden was quite often built before the big houses were built. It was that important to get the kitchen garden in the right spot, south facing. So we're actually quite excited about having vegetables back at Bugh Trig for the family,
So what are some of the things in a kitchen garden in Scotland that everyone has to grow? Like, what are the important staples?
Oh, well, obviously techies, potatoes, onions, leeks, cabbages, maybe the asparagus.
Mm-hmm. That takes a couple of years for you guys, right? 3?
Oh, yes, yeah, 3 years to get established and starts to go well.
That's not easy. People I find aren't very patient nowadays. They want everything instantly, and imagine planting a vegetable knowing you're not going to get to eat it for 3 more years.
I know it's the age we live in, isn't it? Patience is a virtue, so to say. Once over years ago, we didn't have computers and the internet when I started gardening. I know, and you did have to have a bit of patience. But the days coming back, a lot more people are interested in it, a lot more people are taking time, and a lot more people are willing to show a bit of patience to grow things.
You mentioned, was it your father was an allotment gardener?
My father was an allotment gardener, yes.
That's starting to become popular in North America now.
Mm-hmm.
Community gardens are just starting to really, there's waiting lists. My friend lives in Los Angeles, California, and at her community garden, the waiting list is 1,000. That's how long they'll keep 1,000 names on the waiting list.
Good grief.
I mean, you can imagine, and there's so much concrete, right? Everyone's looking for a little square inch to garden.
Well, it's very, very popular over here, and unfortunately, lots of places are trying to close allotments down over here to build on, and there's a constant sort of battle to open allotments and keep them going, and what have you. You think about it, how many gardeners, so I'm talking gardeners like myself, actually started working on allotments with their parents, and it got instilled into them. It's a very good thing, and they should keep going.
That was the first job I ever had, Mark, was picking potato bugs off the potato plants when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And I mean, my parents were gardeners. Like, I was out in the field with my parents at a very young age.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Like, a lot of children now, they just want to be up on the Xboxes and computer games and this, that, and the other. So, it's good that they're outside in the allotments.
I wanted to ask you what your winters are like. Does it kill off any of your trees, or do your flowers have a tough time?
The winters, yeah. The last couple of winters have been not too bad. They've been quite mild. Wet and mild. A couple of winters before, we had sort of down to minus 17 once over, and a good lot of snow. But what you really do want a good winter. You want good frosts to kill the aphids, the pests, to kill all these sort of things. And what you call a traditional gardener, you want to have a difference between autumn and the winter.
Yeah,
ready for the spring,
This year just passed, this season that just finished. You mentioned your roses and delphiniums. Did you have anything in your garden that either surprised you or frustrated you?
Surprised or frustrated us. The rabbits. We had a couple of rabbits in the garden. They really frustrated us. I can't think of everything that really surprised us. The delphiniums, as I say, were spectacular. The dahlias did lovely as well. The dahlias did really well. We had big beds of dahlias, we grew lots of dahlias, and they grew very well in the sun, obviously coming from South Africa.
Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of listeners, Mark, who are brand new, but they love the flowers. What are some of the common mistakes people make, especially with bulbs? Can you make a couple of tips on people who are just getting started with bulbs?
With bulbs, a lot of people put bulbs straight into a wet soil. What you really want to be doing is, when you're planting bulbs, tulips, etc., get a handful of grit, put them in the bottom to give a bit of great drainage for them. Also, mice can be a bother with planting bulbs, tulips, etc. Another good tip is to get some firelighters, that have paraffin on, and plant them near them, and that'll keep the mice off.
Well, hang on a second. Did you just say plant paraffin firelighters near your bulbs to keep the mice away?
Just little bits, obviously not the whole.
Yeah, just
the
bits.
whole firelighter. Just break a little bit off and just plant it beside it, and the smell of the paraffin will keep the mice away. And it doesn't harm the bulbs either.
Wow. Did you invent that, or did somebody tell you about that?
No. I think it's been used for a lot of time. A lot of years ago, people would soak the bulbs, dip them in paraffin, and then plant them. Do that sort of stuff.
If you can hear me smiling, my wife and I put an entire big area of bulbs one year into our yard in late November in a freezing rainstorm. It was most miserable, and in the spring, every single one of them got eaten by mice. And I always remember that because it was just so frustrating. That's a good tip. Yeah. We have these things called groundhogs, too. They look like giant beavers, and they eat everything. We had our first skunk in our garden this year, so I always love to hear rodent stories from around the world. Mm-hmm. Another thing I wanted to ask you, Mark, because you have such a beautiful garden, and it's is there anything you like to grow that people come up to you or maybe go, what's that? Like something unusual or exotic?
We have a few plants in here that are, people ask about. One of the plants actually came from America. It was brought over by a lady. The seeds were brought over by a lady that was visiting the house many, many years ago. And it's what you would call American pokeweed. Ooh. Virginian pokeweed. Mm-hmm. Phytolacca americana. And the amount of people that comment on this plant, you wouldn't believe. It starts off with I don't know if you know it, it's lovely pink flowers with a green centre. And that green centre over the summer becomes a berry. And then come the autumn, that berry goes a very deep sort of purple. And it's a very architectural looking plant. It's quite stunning, actually.
I'm going to have to put a picture up on the website. That'll be a first for a lot of people, myself included.
Somebody actually told me that the ink from the Phytolacca was what was used to sign the Declaration of Independence.
Whoa, that's a good story. I'm just taking notes here. That's funny. Declaration of Independence. I love these stories because my mother-in-law is an international seed smuggler. She's so good at keeping plants alive. But at the airports now, they ask you, you're not allowed to bring stuff.
No.
Probably would.
Do.
Yeah.
Many people do. My previous boss constantly kept bringing bits and pieces to us in the garden that had been wrapped in tissue and brought over.
That's my mother-in-law. She'll rip a leaf off a plant, put it in a moist tissue in her shoe, and fly halfway around the world, and it's alive. I'm always most impressed. Very good, very good. When you're moving your seasons in your garden, and you're leaving summer now, approaching winter, do you have a lot of work to get ready for the winter, putting stuff to bed?
Oh, yes. I obviously have the summer. The dahlias, for instance, you've got to wait until the frost knocks them back and blackens them. Mm. And once that's done, all the dahlias get lifted, and we have about 200 of them. They all get lifted and stored, cut back and stored. And then herbaceous borders, we've got a lot of herbaceous borders. They're all cut back and tidied up, ready for the winter. And then once all the borders is cut, obviously the roses as well as all the prune, and then get the beds all turned over before winter really sets in. So I like to get the beds all turned over by the end of December, and just turn it over rough and let the frost break all the soil down, so come spring it's easier to turn over again. So let the frost do the work.
Let the frost do the work. That's a good quote. That makes a lot of sense. 200 plus dahlias. That's incredible.
Oh, they're stunning.
Yeah. Bugh Trig Garden's open to the public part of the year? Or?
Bugh Trig's open from the 1st of June to the 1st of September every year. It's a nice little garden.
Oh, yeah. They must book it for weddings and pictures and...
No, we actually don't have weddings here or pictures. We get lots of tours. We get bus tours come from Historic House Association, from various horticultural societies. They come around and then it's sort of, and I'll give them a tour of the garden. And then during the week, it's open to the public from, as I say, the 1st of June to the 1st of September, Monday to Sunday. And people just come in and just have a wander. And if they want to know anything, they come and find us and we'll have a bit chat about the garden and I'll tell a few tales.
You know, Mark, I was explaining to an American friend of mine about the British culture with gardening, how you do it like nobody else in the world. I mean, the British are the best gardeners on earth, I think, sometimes. And, you know, how Prince Charles is really into, you know, permaculture and gardening himself. Mm-hmm. Have you ever had any royalty come through at your garden?
We have, yes. There's a statue in the garden of Admiral Ramsay. We actually had a member of the royal family coming just to have a look at the statue.
Brilliant. Let's take a quick minute to thank our sponsors and then come back and play 5 quick questions. Can you really grow a massive garden powered by fish? Find out the secret to aquaponics and the building fish-powered gardens at www.backtomygarden.com/fish. Attention garden lovers, do you want to save time, save money, and have your most amazing garden ever? Receive free tips, strategies, and gardening techniques from amazing gardeners around the world. Join the VIP club for free today at www.backtomygarden.com/VIP. You know, I looked at the clock here, Mark, and our half hour is rapidly running by. I wanted to ask you a couple, we call it 5 quick questions. This is a chance for you to share your wisdom and experience with novice or beginner gardeners. You ready to play?
Well, yes.
Question number 1. What advice would you have for somebody terrified of starting their own first garden?
What advice? Enjoy it. Enjoy, have fun while you're doing it. And obviously you're going to make mistakes, but just learn by them. As long as you're having fun and you're enjoying being out, you know, doing stuff in the garden, Brilliant. So much the better. Just have fun.
You've been gardening most of your life. Have you ever planted something that didn't grow?
Well, I couldn't say I've planted something that hasn't grown, but I have made mistakes. When I first started, when I first left school, I was working at a garden, big garden, helping out, and I heard about manure water. I've been told all about that. And I thought, all right, here we go. An idea is you gather sheep muck,
mm-hmm.
and you put it in the water, and that makes the manure water to water your plants, to feed them. So I went to the field, I collected a good load of sheep dottles. I then proceeded to take the barrow down the garden path and shovel the whole lot into a lovely stone trough to make the water. Well, obviously, everything floated to the surface. What I should have done is put it all in a Hessian sack and then put it into the water. But I didn't. I did get in bother for that, mind.
I understand completely. I did the same thing myself this summer.
But that was one of the first mistakes I ever made in the garden. And I haven't told many people about that, actually.
And now on an international podcast, you confessed.
It's all come out. Oh, dear.
Sheep is really good, though, isn't it? It's one of the best manures.
It is one of the best manures. When I was down in Yorkshire, because I worked in Yorkshire for a few years, there was actually a deer park on the estate, and we found an old sort of soil recipe, and it included deer droppings in the soil recipe.
Wow.
In the garden, this old kitchen garden.
Nobody has deer manure. That's a very exotic one. I like that.
It is.
Up here where I live, it might be moose. We have these giant, the moose manure. But it must be really important when you have 200 dahlias to take care of, like a huge bed. You must have to feed the soil fairly regularly.
I do. I use Gromo a lot for to feed them. I sort of turn the soil over, as I say now, and then come the spring, I'll turn it over again to a finer tilth, and then sprinkle the Gromo on, and then just rake it all in, and then leave it until it's ready for planting out, which will be last week in May, which is traditionally the time last week in May, first week in June for planting out bedding plants. Get them in. Then I'll water them for a couple of weeks, and then I'll stop watering them so the roots can find their own way down to their water source. Because if you keep watering them, the roots all stop at the surface. And once there's a drought, they'll really suffer. But if the roots have gone down to find their own water, they'll not suffer as much in the drought.
That's a huge tip. That's fantastic. I'm still at that stage because my wife's very experienced gardener, but I overwater and over-fertilize everything. Like if a little is good, give it more. And I have a lot of unhappy tomatoes in my garden sometimes.
Yeah.
An old farmer said, well, they got wet feet. And I said, what do you mean wet feet? He says, you're watering way too much.
You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like to be stood there in the pot with your feet in water.
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, I always think of fertilizer like steroids. You know, I want to make giant tomatoes, and it doesn't work that way. I'm still learning. Very good. Hey, you must have big trees on your estate too, right?
There's some great big trees on the estate. We've got a load of Wellingtonias. I think you'd call them the Washington tree, would you?
I don't know. I'm going to look that one up. Wellingtonias.
Wellingtonias, yeah. We've got some of them. We actually had one hit with lightning about 8 years ago. And we had to get the top third of the tree cut off. It was one of the tallest trees on the estate. And then when we cut it down, we counted the rings, and there was about 150 of them. And they were introduced into the country about 1856. So looking at that, that'll be one of the original ones that was introduced into the country.
You know, I sometimes wonder, like when you said you went to a high school that had an agriculture program, where I live, that's very rare. But wow, like it can set a path for a kid in his whole life can just be with a passion that makes a difference. We're having a real problem right now with kids going to universities and spending a lot of money, and then they can't find any careers afterwards. No,
and I must admit, I have the school I went to. Obviously, I lived in the countryside. Went to this school. It was an agricultural high school. There was there was cattle, there was pigs, there was crops for the agricultural side. And on the horticultural side, there was glass houses, there was polytunnels, there was, bedding, there was house plants, all of that. I was very, very fortunate in that.
We have a lot of parents that listen to this show. I just want to encourage them, take a note from Mark's career path here that there will always be a career for somebody very knowledgeable and educated about growing food and taking care of gardens.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feed 10 billion people?
Well, that's it. Years ago, being a gardener was one of the most sought after positions on these big estates.
Absolutely. Very good. You know, our time is winding down here, Mark. I wanted to see if you wanted to share maybe a pearl of wisdom or a note of encouragement for all the people out there that are just getting started in gardening.
A pearl of wisdom. Pearl of wisdom. Right. Now then, your herbaceous borders. Come the winter, you've cut them all back. In the spring, they're starting to reach out and stretch for the sun, and you see them. Before they get too much bigger, remember to put your supports out over the top of them, because they'll grow quicker than what you think, and then by that time it'll be too late for you to put the supports on to hold the plants up, and you'll end up snapping them.
Fantastic. Oh, and Mark, for those people listening who are on social media, they can follow you on Twitter, right?
They can, yes.
And that's at Bugh Trig Garden. That's BUGHTRIGGARDEN.
Yeah.
And I know you share a lot of good stuff on there. And
I try to.
Yeah. And if you're ever in Scotland, you can definitely visit the estate near Berwickshire. Mm-hmm. Very good. Mark,
there's also another website, Grow London, which my boss is sort of promoting a new garden fair down in London.
Grow London.
.co.uk. Yeah. No, GROW London .com.
.com. He's got the .com. Very good.
Yeah. Which is a contemporary fair for both novice and experienced gardeners, whether you've got a big garden or a small garden, just to encourage people to get out there and enjoy themselves.
I love it. I love the whole culture. Scotland, England, Wales, all just fantastic gardeners.
We've actually got a big camel in the peach house. It's a full-size camel we have sitting in the peach house in the gardens.
Oh, and when does your water feature go in? Next spring?
Next spring, or maybe the next back end. Next back end.
Looking forward to hear about that. A lot of people are interested in that type. I guess that's not really gardening, but it is because of the water lilies and all the plants, and it's such a unique branch.
The thing is, Dave, if we can get people in the garden and it can make them smile, it's really worth it.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth it for people, even something so that looks daft. If it can bring a smile to your face in the garden, it's worth it. At least it gets you outside.
Brilliant. Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
That's no bother.
All of the links, resources, and websites mentioned in this episode will be posted at www.backtoMyGarden.com/65. If you enjoyed this episode, please come to the website and click share and help us reach even more gardeners. Have an amazing day. Happy gardening.